Today's conversation is going to be about a topic that I think is of significant importance for anybody who is looking to either get started or has just gotten started in a business venture and really wants to make the most out of that experience. And quickly, in terms of my own experience, I transitioned out of school leadership into executive coaching about a year and a half ago. And so that was an interesting transition for me because I needed to leave a relatively well-defined, let's call it administrative position, where it's very clear to me as to what my role was. At least it was supposed to, it's relatively clear. And it depends who you ask, of course. And then all of a sudden move into this much more amorphous setting where I was going out on my own. And I needed really to have the capacity by which to do so and sort of figure that out. And so this is a presentation that comes partially from experience, partially from research. I'd like for it to be somewhat interactive if we can, and hopefully we can make some good headway in our conversation today. I entitled it The Vitamin C's of Getting Started, or take lots of vitamin C, whatever the proper term, because of the fact that all the key ideas that we will look at today begin with the letter C. And of course, vitamin C is very healthy for you, so hopefully it's a good correlation between the two. That's another C word not part of the presentation, and hopefully it will be something that we can benefit from. Again, there is a handout, and the handout, which is on that back chair over there, does have all of the 8 points that I hope to get to today, right there. And so hopefully that'll be beneficial, and we can jump right into our conversation. Okay, so here you have the list. Now, this is not a comprehensive list. We're not going to literally, in 30 some odd minutes that we have together, cover the A to Z's. Probably shouldn't have used that considering I'm focusing on C's anyway, but cover all there is to deal with as it relates to starting a business. It's a very, very comprehensive conversation. What I'm hoping to do is to give some of the overview, to mention some ideas, and of course, if you'd like to continue the conversation further, if there's something here that really resonates with you, please take a card, please be in touch, and we'll see how I can be helpful. But again, if we hit on these 8 points and really delve into some of them a little bit more deeply, I think the takeaway should be meaningful for hopefully everybody here. All right? So right here, pretty straightforward. Clarify, credential, customize, connect, collect, confidence, charitableness, and cushion. Those are the 8 that I identified for our talk today. We're going to go through them one at a time. So clarify. Now, this is probably the busiest slide. There's a lot in it. I want to go through each of them with you, but I think it's really important for us to know on a macro level as well as on a micro level, what is it that we're looking to do? Right? When my goal is to achieve clarity over here, what am I seeking, both in terms of my profession as well as my financial goals? Now that's a really important piece, and it might go without saying. Some of you might just say, okay, I get that. That makes a lot of sense. But I do think there are a lot of people out there who sort of figure they're going to try to figure it out as they go. The more that you can be clear from the outset of what it is that you want to do and who it is that you want to target and what your ideal market is, the better you're going to be in driving your product, your image, your word out there in a way that really resonates with that specific individual. So I'll use my own example for a moment. As I mentioned before, I do coaching. Okay? Now you probably know that there's many types of coaches that are flavors of ice cream at Baskin-Robbins. Okay? There's executive coaching, there's leadership coaching, there's career coaching, there's life coaching, and many, many other types. Okay? Now, even within that group, who specifically might you choose to be targeting? Right? Are you looking to have a particular demographic? Are you interested in servicing a particular type of person? Let's say, for example, within executive coaching, you want to work with school leadership. Or you want to work with executive directors. Or you want to work with people who are in the C-suite capacity. Whatever that level might be. So now, everything that I choose to do, and we're going to talk about getting your message out there a little bit later, but everything I choose to do is going to be done with that target audience in mind. It's called establishing a niche, and we're going to get further into that as we go further. But the more you identify what it is that you want, and then figuring out what tools do I use. We'll come back to that further also when we talk about credentialing. Because it's really important. It's not just enough to say, here I am, I hang my shingle, and I'm ready to roll. Okay? Now, creating a vision. I will argue that something along these lines is something that is extremely important, that is oftentimes overlooked. Right? We want to get started, we're so busy, we're so anxious, we're trying to make all of those pieces fall into place, and we don't take that step back to create that vision. But if you create the vision, you're really giving yourself a tremendous advantage, because you can start. Now, it doesn't mean that your vision is etched in stone. It doesn't mean that you can't adjust it. When I first started, I had a bigger vision of who I wanted to service in my coaching capacity. I've since scaled it back, because I feel that to try to be there for everybody and not be very clear on who I'm targeting, there's so many people out there doing this. There's so many people out there, if you're interested in law, if you're interested in marketing, if you're interested in selling a product. Now, sometimes the product is unique and distinct, and that alone will give you that opportunity. But sometimes your product is similar enough to many others where you have to figure out how are you going to create the right market for your product, and you're going to make sure that your product meets that market's needs. So the more you have your vision of who you're targeting, and you create your benchmarks, where do I want to be in 6 months from now? Where do I want to be in a year from now? Where do I want to be in 5 years from now? So you have your numbers. Again, all of that can be modified, right? There are certain things that are beyond your control. There's no way to know how quickly you're going to get out there. Some people have a tremendous amount of muscle, and they're able to have this accelerator, whatever that might look like, that's going to put them out there a lot faster than what most people find. But if you do your homework, and you ask people who have done it, which I did, maybe not as much as I could have, but I went and I sat and I talked to people who coach, people who consulted, and I said, how long does it take for you to figure out your place and for people to know about you and all these various things? And when I learned that information, it helped me to craft my vision, and it helped me to start to create the timetable that I needed in order to ultimately be successful at it. Talk to people, what did you do well? What didn't work so well for you? And I think this last question could be very, very valuable. Right? You're in this specific domain. If you could start again, you've been in it for 5 years. Okay? Yes, you've had a lot of successes, you've had certain challenges. Some of those challenges might not have been, had nothing to do with you, it might have been market or other things. But if you could start again, with everything you know now, how would you do it different? And I would strongly encourage anybody who's just starting out or thinking about starting out to do as much homework as you can. Find out everything there is to know about your business. And I would even ask them, what trends do you envision moving forward? Right? What do you see in terms of governmental legislation? What do you see in terms of changing marketplace? What do you see in terms of technology that might change the conventional form? So if you've been in merchandise and you've been selling, whether you have a storefront or whether you're doing it, going out to different locations and selling your product, what do you know about these various things that could change the way I do business moving forward? Because the way people did business 10, 15, maybe even 2 years ago could be very different than the way it's being done today. And that's something you need to stay on top of. Okay, any questions or comments? Yes, please.
Just one point,
sure.
Not in conjunction with this, but you mentioned the C's.
Yes.
So when you're envisioning your business from, let's say, year 1 to year 5, how focused and how often does the owner or the leader have to go over the C of capital? If capital depends what you need to put into the company so that it stays afloat or continues to.
So I think the answer to your question is that whatever you determine are your key components in that vision have to be revisited on a regular basis. In other words, I don't think it's sufficient to create that vision and sort of leave it and then check back a year later, did we hit our goals? People who I see that are successful are continually meeting with their team or doing their own soul searching, and they're setting time to do this. That's another thing that I would say, is that if you're starting up, especially if you're on your own, it can be another C, consuming, very consuming. And you're so busy trying to think of your next step that it's hard to take the step back and determine where am I vis-a-vis my goals, and do I need to make an adjustment. And that I would say is extremely important. I would put it on your calendar. Again, another C, but not one that I put there. But I would put it on your calendar. And I would literally hold myself accountable to that. And perhaps you can do that on a Sunday. Or perhaps you could do that on a Motzei Shabbos, depending on whatever it might be, that you feel you don't have to be at your computer working, but you want to be there accomplishing, and you want the quiet time to do it. That would probably be a good time to do it.
More weekly rather than monthly? Or?
Weekly might be too hard. You know, sometimes you want to check in, but you check in so frequently you can't see the forest from the trees. You know what I mean? If you're so busy noticing who's viewed your profile on LinkedIn on a day-to-day basis, you don't see the patterns. So sometimes when you check too often, it becomes hard to really see how are you progressing, but I would say minimally every few months you want to be checking in. And again, you might not need to do anything. I have a friend who's a financial planner, I think that's what he is, in Toronto, and he manages people's stocks. And the portfolios are pretty, you know, they're blue chip stocks, not very, you know, fancy, so to speak. But, so I said, what do you do all day? You know, you just basically buy and hold, is what it sounded like. So he said, I just make sure that everything continues to go right. I read the research, I make sure that there's no major bumps along the way, and I just manage it. You know, some people are buying and selling constantly. I'm not here to talk about that, it's not my field. But what I can tell you is that even that alone has value. You want to feel affirmed that you're in the right direction. And if you're not, you have to have the courage. The word courage is important. You have to have the courage and the fortitude to say, you know what, this was my vision, but I need to adjust it because I'm clearly not succeeding. And I had to do that, as I mentioned before, because I decided that in order for me to really succeed, I needed to narrow who I was targeting and change my message a little bit in order to meet their needs and make them interested in me. Again, let's not forget, we're in a virtual marketplace where you could access anyone, anywhere in the world. You know, I rarely go shopping anymore. My wife still enjoys going into brick and mortar. I rarely do that. The camcorder that I'm using for this presentation, which I just bought this past week because my other one had an issue, I bought it on Amazon. I usually do all of my shopping like that online. Okay? Now Amazon, I don't know where they are. It doesn't matter to me. And there are hundreds of similar, if not thousands of similar vendors out there that I could easily buy a product from. So why am I going to Amazon versus somebody else? It might be nature of my experience with them, it might be the free shipping, it might be this, it might be that, it doesn't matter. But they're competing for space with a lot of other people who have the exact same product that Amazon is selling. So how am I going to distinguish myself? Having that clarity, knowing who I'm targeting, and then going after them is going to make a difference. Okay, any other questions or comments? I really do appreciate the fact that some of you have asked. You don't have to, but feel free. Okay, number 2. This is really important as well, and I've already touched on it. Credentialing. Credentialing means that you have the wherewithal to do what you want to do, and people believe in your expertise. Now, I do realize that when you're selling merchandise, and perhaps you're selling certain other things versus, let's say, offering a service, maybe that credentialing looks a little bit different. And what you have to do, right? You don't have to get a PhD in order to sell jewelry. You don't have to get a PhD in order to, you know, sell internet service or whatever you might be doing. But minimally, people want to know that you really are an expert in your field. And the more you can distinguish yourself in that way, we talked before about offering some free content. There are trade papers. There are other platforms for your specific, maybe you join a LinkedIn group, and the LinkedIn group deals with people who are of a similar nature, or people who are looking for that type of product. And you put yourself out there as an expert in that field. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, of course, is to develop that expertise from the outset, and to make sure that when you walk in there, people say, you know, this guy, he knows what he's talking about. And then they make the most important thing of all, which is referrals. Because in this business, regardless, yes, they'll find you on the internet. That can be valuable to you. But what really, let's not forget, you know, there are some companies that are very successful despite the anonymous nature of the relationship. I'm thinking of Geico, for example. Right? Geico still has the most customers, I believe, largely because they're still the most competitive. And they have good customer service at the end of the day. But there are a lot of people who will only use the Allstates and the State Farms and the other insurers because they have an agent. They have a person that they can talk to. And let's not diminish, despite social media and Web 2.0 and all of the virtual nature by which we connect with one another, people still want to know that you have the goods. in literal and figurative terms. And the more that you can show them in what you say, in what you write, in what you demonstrate, even if you're sharing other people's content, but you're showing that you're willing to do that and you're interested in that, that can be helpful in securing people's confidence. So people want to see, are you somebody who's a go-to person in the field? And what do I need? So part of that same question that you're going to ask that person that you interview, right? How did you be successful? How did you get there? What credentials did you need in order to get there? Now, coming back to coaching just for a moment, there are some people who go through a conventional coaching course. There are some people who just hang up a sign and make a business card and say, I'm a coach. Right? There are people like that. In some fields you can get away with that. In some fields you really can't. And you need to know that. And that's part of your research that you're going to follow. Okay? So far we talked about clarity, getting a clear sense of where you want to go, and how you're going to position yourself to get there. And that includes credentialing. What is the education that I need? What is the real life experience that I need? And maybe you're going to take 3 to 6 months and you're going to volunteer or maybe get some low-paying position in an area which you're looking to go into. To get a field you like it, right? That's important. You have to have a passion for what you do. But besides for that, do you have the tools? People want to know that you have that experience. So the more that you can do that, let's call it a training opportunity, and really feel it out, the easier it's going to be for you to use the right language. I was talking to a person today, driving in my car over here to the expo, and this person is an educational coach. And so I said, I hope you're familiar with, because he was talking about meeting with a company that would do coaching in a public school setting. I said, I hope you're familiar with, and I used a few terms. And I said, if you know this language, people are going to feel that you're an expert as an educational coach. And I think every field has that language. Every field has that idea, certain skills that you need to be able to demonstrate from the beginning. And the more trained you are, I would say, by the way, learning on the job could work, but learning before is even better. Because once you start to put yourself out there as a semi-serious practitioner, once you put yourself out there as somebody who's not as good as really he should be, then people will sort of dismiss you the next time you have something to tell them. So the more you can do to make sure that from the beginning people can trust you and they can take your word and run with it, you're going to really earn their trust moving forward. But anything that has your name, if it's not of quality, be very careful. Because your name, there are a lot of people who tell me this all the time, my name is the most important thing that I have. And if I do anything at all to ruin my reputation, I'm finished. Because it's hard to get back, especially with the internet, extremely hard to get back. People put comments out there about you. Unfortunately, it happens to basically everybody. It's extremely hard to undo that damage. So having the credentials and exhibiting the confidence, as we'll talk about, is going to go a long way and help you succeed. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Now, customization. We mentioned this before. This quote from Bill Gates, I think, is important, but I think it really relates to anyone who's been successful. They say about Steve Jobs, the former CEO at Apple. You might be familiar, he had 2 rounds at Apple. He was a co-founder, I believe it was, at the beginning, was fired, and then came back. And in Steve Jobs 2.0, in his return, he found Apple sort of as a wandering entity, not really clear on where it wanted to be. So according to the story that I read, he writes this matrix on a piece of paper, on the board, whatever it was, with the highest ranking members of the administrative team. And he puts there 4 things. He's got laptops, desktop, and he had 2 others over here, home and office, I think they were. And he said, everything that fits into this matrix, that's something that we're going to focus on. Anything not, we cut off to the side, and we get rid of it. Because if you read Jim Collins' book, which if you haven't, you need to. It's called From Good to Great, or From Good to Great. It's read, it's sold millions of copies. It's called it's either Good to Great or From Good to Great. It's from Jim Collins. And he talks about what distinguishes good companies from companies that outperform the market many times over. And one of the things that he talks about is having a hedgehog concept. They really, really focused on what you're good at and really focus on what your core mission is. And so many companies, so many business ventures go off because they try to diversify beyond their core. They try to get too fancy. Now, I'm not suggesting you can't or shouldn't diversify. I've seen from Warren Buffett and others, you need to have other ways by which to move yourself forward if something isn't working. But if you lose your sense of who you are and what your business is really about, you're going to really find yourself having a hard time moving things forward. Now, connection, we talked about this a little bit before. I think that this is an area in our community in particular. An event like this is a great example, but I have made so many connections with people I don't even know exist. I had somebody who told me today, I see your articles, I happen to write quite a bit, so I see your articles in place such and such, and I really like what you said. I've had a number of people who have reached out to me because they've read my articles. We talked about this idea before. Reaching out to people. Before you leave, I'd love for you to take some contact information, but one card that I have now, I just made it recently because I just published an ebook recently. You can download a free leadership ebook that I wrote, and I put it on the business card, etc. When I do that, I'm making a new connection. And that connection might be valuable to me as I continue to try to grow my business. So making those connections on a regular basis, proactively growing your list. Think that this piece, as we talked about before, you come to a place like an expo, have a target number. How many people do you want to meet today? And what kind of people do you want to meet today? So I know I want to meet executives. So I'm walking around as much as I can, going to booths and looking for that person. Now that person may not be here. Maybe he sent his marketing team, his sales team, somebody else. And so that's also important for me to know. But making connections with the right people. Who are my potential clients? And how do I engage with them on a regular basis? You know what? I'm so glad you're part of my email list. Have a free ebook. I'm so glad you're part of this. And you find ways by which to expand your network. People don't want to be on lists. Right? Most people. Some people might love getting 1,000 emails every day. If you are, maybe we need to talk. I'm just kidding. But on a more serious note, most people either get off lists quickly if they find themselves inadvertently getting on them, or even if they chose to get on that list, unless it really speaks to them, at some point they're going to unsubscribe. And so the only way to keep people on your list, the only way to keep people interested in connecting with you, is if what they see from you is good content, and in a way that's not too obtrusive, and they feel that engaging with you is going to be helpful to them. That's the way we are. Most people want to know what's in it for me. And so how is my connection with you going to help me? How is it going to help me expand my business? But being proactive, figuring out what are the sites, where would I find these people, and then having a presence there and making those connections. That's going to make a difference for you. Okay, now number 5, I love to do this. In fact, I will do this with clients whenever I can. Sometimes at workshops too, but it's a little bit harder. I will ask people for a few sentences of feedback about how I did. Now you could be collecting this for your website. You could be collecting this for your literature. You might just be collecting it in your mind. But when people know, when you know you've got good referrals and you actively collect them, testimonials are extremely powerful. And they speak a lot to your successes and how people relate to you. So the more you're able to tell them, by connecting with so-and-so, I got this out of it. His presentation was fantastic. His product is excellent. His service is unbeatable, right? People want to know these things, and they're not necessarily going to call you and ask you. So the more you could put out there where they can easily find it, where they don't have to work too hard, and not everybody feels comfortable asking you 1,000 questions. They want to know everything they can find out about you without asking you a single thing. At least that's the way I am. And if you're like me, then you probably also, you want to do as much background checking as you can. How do people find this service here? And everything, that goes alongside it. And if you have the testimonials, and you have the referrals, and people are your fans, and they're out there, speaking on your behalf, that's going to help you significantly in whatever business you're in. Any comments or questions? Okay. Now, confidence is another piece of it. We talked earlier about credentialing and expertise. How you present yourself can be very significant. I had somebody today who I was talking with recently, and he said to me, when I speak to you, I sense that you are confident in what you do, whatever that was. To me, that was a big compliment, because it means that when I'm communicating with other people, they're sensing this person has expertise. You might have expertise. We've all talked to experts that have certain mannerisms, certain ways of speaking, certain other issues, if you will, in their bedside manner that trump their expertise, perhaps. They might know more. I have a guy who I brought into my house to do work on some steps. And the way he talks, he's not from America. His language is an issue, so to speak. But it's not just a language issue. It's a whole set of manners. I almost feel like I'm getting yelled at every time I talk to this person. I know it's an extreme example. But I don't want to talk to this guy any more than I absolutely have to. So if I have another project where I have a person who's confident, who's calm, who's able to talk about what he does and does well, and I have somebody else who maybe just seems to be unsettled, etc., then I'm certainly going to choose the person who exudes that confidence. And you can only get that. Some people can fake it very well. Okay? Some people don't know a lot, and yet they can get up in front of a crowd and wow them because of the way that they present. Most people are not gifted in that regard. Most people need to have that degree of confidence and experience in what they're doing, be able to come back to stories, incidents, experiences, and use that. Parenthetically, I will say that I just wrote an article not that long ago about something which I think is very important for businesses today. They call it storytelling. Now, when I first heard about storytelling, I thought of what probably most of you think about, which is, younger children and whatnot. And it seems very juvenile. But the reality is, as we talked about before with the issue of getting to know people and people wanting to have a relationship with you, storytelling tells people who you are. Right? Oftentimes on a website it'll have an about us. And sometimes the about us will just have key personnel, in their job description, and maybe a little bit more. But a story talks about your passion. A story talks about your expertise. A story talks about your interest. How did you get to where you are? People love stories. The people who are the most successful presenters usually are great storytellers. And they integrate them regularly into their talk. A little Vart, a little idea, and boom, here's a story. Okay? I'll bet the stories that I've mentioned before, any references, any anecdotes, probably got more of your attention than any of the, so to speak, nuts and bolts, meats and potato pieces that I mentioned. Because that's the way we relate. Right? We connect with people and people's experiences. So the more that you can share about your experiences, what gives you the ability to do and to say what you're saying, and give you the credibility behind it, and you communicate it in that type of way with that confidence, that's going to make a difference. So that's something to think about. Okay? And lastly, a couple more over here. Number one is charitableness. That is a word, actually. Okay? Now, being charitable, I think, is really important because, again, how do we distinguish ourselves? How do we gain people's trust? And how do we gain people's business? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm willing to give, the fact that I'm a generous person. But we all love things that are free. I'm sure you've walked around the expo so far. You may have had no interest in what that person was selling. But if they had a freebie on their table, everything from a candy to a back scratcher to a who knows what, a squeezy item, whatever it might be, we love free things, right? I put out this free ebook recently, and it's free. People can sign up, no problem. I bet if I put a 99-cent price tag to it, or even a 29-cent price tag to it, my percentage of downloads would have been reduced probably to maybe 10%, I'm guessing, of that number. Because the second that there's a price attached to it, all of a sudden, we take a step back. We start to think about it. Do I really want to invest in this? Etc., etc. So the more that you are charitable with your time, the more you're able to give of your time for free. Right? I offer, for example, a 30-minute free consultation. It's not a big deal for me, and it could potentially reap great rewards on the back end. Right? I offer free content wherever I can, free advice whenever possible. That's one piece of it. Another piece is, can you demonstrate civic duty and let's call it responsibility? In our community, maybe there's less of an interest in this, but I think in the community at large, people want to know what charities, what organizations are you involved with? What boards do you sit on? What are you passionate about? there's this whole other side to it. Now, I find it interesting that on LinkedIn, it tends to be a very stodgy, business-like, very crisp type of place where you list all of your credentials, and you also list your skills, and people, reflect based on that. Then you go to Twitter. And Twitter's a whole different animal, okay? No pun intended. But one thing that I find fascinating is that the same people on LinkedIn might write CEO, business manager, and they'll list all of their information. On Twitter, they might write CEO and this and that, but they're going to write things like coffee junkie, right? Proud father of 6, skier, life liver, all sorts of weird things like this, usually with a hashtag. And it's fascinating because Twitter seems to be a place where people can sort of balance the nexus between their professional profile, who they are and what they're interested in, as well as their personal passion. They usually don't belong on a resume. They usually don't want to say. But sometimes when people can see that there's this other side of you, right, and you have this other passion, interest, etc., they might become more interested in you as a result of that. So giving, and giving of your time, giving of your expertise, to the degree that you can, where you can still monetize and be successful, that's one piece. And then the last one, we talked about this at the very beginning, going into any new enterprise, trying to give yourself, look, sometimes you can't do it. You get laid off in a position, and you have to move into something quickly, you don't have that flexibility. I had a little bit of lead time in terms of what I chose to do, not nearly enough. But the more that you can create that cushion, the more that you can be sensible about it. How can I continue to build what I'm doing while still making sure that I don't feel the pressure of the panic button? Because oftentimes when you feel that pressure, that takes you off. To me, the main thing isn't just feeding your family for the first 6 to 18 months. It's more than that. It's about when will we lose sight of what we really want to do because we feel so pressured to make a buck today. So instead of me spending my let's call it my summer, or next few months writing that book that I think is going to really be a difference maker for me in the next 6 to 10 to 12 months, and I'm going to focus the next few weeks on writing that, right? I'm going to take such and such a position, or I'm going to pursue some small things so I can make a few dollars so that I have money today. In other words, right, we often get stuck in the short term and the long term. The short term is important. We have to pay the bills. We have to survive. But the more that you can maintain that long-term vision, the more that you can create that cushion where I'm going to somehow make it through this and that because I feel that in that time frame I can do these things that may not monetize so well immediately, but are going to position me for great success down the road. And sort of having that balanced view, that can be extremely powerful for people because, like we said all this entire time, the more we can do to distinguish ourselves, the more that we can show that we're experts, and the more that ultimately people can start to trust us. Once you establish the relationship, my experience has been, it begins to snowball in a positive way. All of a sudden, the referrals continue to grow. All of a sudden, there's new interest because you are an expert. And think about it like this. The people who are very successful in almost every field are wildly successful. The real leadership gurus, extremely successful. The real educators, they're every workshop keynoting this and that. The people who know, right, technology, whatever it might be, if you have somehow found a way to distinguish yourself and put yourself in that top 5, 10% of really distinguished people, then it seems like, in most cases, they are on a pathway of limitless opportunity so long as they continue to feed that process that has gotten them to that point. But the rest of us are down here. And you have to figure out, how can I distinguish myself enough that people want to seek me out because they know this is the shoe store to find, this is the jeweler, this is the service provider, the marketer. That's the guy I want. And the more that we can find a way to get us to that point, hopefully the more we can find ultimate success.